The topic of privilege has become a much more popular and trendy topic over the last few years, which I think it's a good thing. And it has left a lot of people feeling stuck, I think, and using a lot of different strategies to try to deal with the discomfort of having privilege when others don't have that same privilege, having access to resources, access to certain kind of experiences, access to different types of communities that other folks that have marginalized identities don't have access to. Dealing with that discomfort, we do a lot of weird stuff to try to make up for that or make ourselves feel better about that or make other people feel better about that. I really want to talk about how to use your privilege for good. And this video might surprise you because it's so simple. And just because it's simple doesn't mean it's necessarily easy. So I'm going to walk you through my thoughts on, for me, and what I teach to others around their privilege, how to use it for good, and really take a hold of this experience that you have just because you were born into the family and community and country that you were born into, whatever the body that you were born into, whatever that looks like, whatever your privileges are, how to really take a hold of that. Because when we don't, there's a risk of us not knowing how our privilege is being used in a certain context or a certain space, how we are navigating the world around us and how that's impacting the world around us. So I'm really excited to have this conversation, and if this is interesting to you, then definitely stick around. Hey, I'm Andrea. If you're new to me, I create content and programs for people who want to make a difference in the world, or at the very least know that something different in this world is possible. So if that's you, you're in the right place. Everything I do is rooted in understanding that you are the system and the revolution, and what you do with who you are and what you have matters. And that is why today we are talking about how to use your privilege for good. Number one, pay attention to the way your privilege works. In order to pay attention to that, I want to clarify what I mean when I'm talking about privilege, because there's a lot of different understandings and feelings about this word. It can trigger a lot in us, and here's what I have on that. So, one, you have certain social identities and positioning based on where you are in the world, based on what cultures you're a part of, based on the body you were born into. There are a handful of identities that are generally and collectively considered to be safe, normal, better, right, and in general more valuable. And what those identities are depends on what context you're within. It changes depending on what country or culture that you're a part of. Even if you enter a certain building, that might change. In the context of the United States, my privileged identities are that I am cisgender, able-bodied. The way that I talk is sometimes considered a privilege because when people hear it, they assign, oh, she's educated, she can speak well, she's more eloquent, and so on and so forth. I have beauty privilege, which means that in most cases, people tend to see me, see my face, see my body, and consider me beautiful. In the context of our world, I have passport privilege. I'm American. English is my first language. Now, all of this I didn't necessarily choose. I didn't come into this world choosing to be all the things that I am or all the things that this world has put on my shoulders of like, this is who you are. So privilege isn't about who you are at your core. It's not about your personality or your character necessarily. Now it can inform or influence who you are and your character, but this is really about what you're carrying around with you whenever you're navigating about the world. This is about how the world engages with you, and therefore from a very young age how you learn to engage back with the world. This is about the experience that you have of life versus the experiences of others that you don't necessarily ever have to think about because they're often disregarded or silenced by our cultures and our institutions, through our media, through education, through our governments. So bringing it back to point number one, paying attention to how your privilege works, thinking about what privilege is, what privileges you have and you hold, and what that means for you. One very important thing that will support you and help you in bringing attention to how your privilege works, to being able to spot when it is at work, is listening to and actively working to understand the experiences of those that don't have that privilege, those that have marginalized identities, those that hold different identities from you, and especially those identities that tend to be disadvantaged or marginalized. So what that can look like is just choosing one privilege that you have, that you hold, one privileged identity that you have, and looking at, okay, what are the other identities that aren't this one that I have? What are the more marginalized identities? And I would actually love if you would share in the comments which one you really want to focus on, which identity you're really wanting to bring more consciousness to around what that privilege looks like. Let me know in the comments. So looking at these other identities that you don't have, this could be you're looking at your race, your ethnicity, your nationality, your gender, your sexuality, your physical status, your size, and there's so much more. But choosing just one that you have privilege in, and then looking at all of the other identities. So for me, like, I could choose being cisgender and look at all of the other identities that aren't cisgender. I could look at transgender folks. I could look at non-binary folks, gender non-conforming folks, and I could look into who's creating content around these experiences, what movies are out that are sharing this experience of folks that hold these identities, what books are out, what organizations are doing work around this right now. And I could do some research and gather some resources that can give me some insight into what is the experience of these folks. What do they have to navigate when they enter into the same spaces that I enter into? And how are our experiences different? So number one is paying attention to the way that your privilege works. Number two is to bring awareness to the decisions that you're making. Now this is super broad and will make more sense when I share 3 and 4, but so often we are making so many decisions every single day. Every single moment we are making a million decisions. Just by coming to this YouTube video, you have made so many decisions that got you here. And I think a huge part of being conscious about what we're creating in the world and using our power and our privilege for good is being aware of what are the decisions that we're already making, and just paying attention to, oh yeah, I'm making that decision and making that decision. Now you want to take care of yourself because there is a thing called decision fatigue. Our brain specifically works to try to make things more automatic and more simple so that we're not always thinking about every decision that we have to make. So we create habits and we get into certain patterns so that we can create a little bit more ease for ourselves. So if you bring too much attention to your decisions, that might make your brain hurt. At least that's my experience. But just even in one moment, just looking at what decisions brought me here. What decisions am I making right now? Bringing attention to that. Number 3 is to clarify what good means to you. When we say using your privilege for good, what does for good mean? What are you trying to create in the world? What would you see and be able to signify, oh yeah, that's good. That's me using it for good. What does that mean? This is something so many of us, I think, take for granted because we're often taught this is what's good and this is what's bad. And I think this is such an important conversation to really look at, what do we deem good and what do we deem bad? How do we know the difference? And where does that come from? Who taught us that? So there's an unpacking of what is good, what does good mean? And there's also a question that honestly I'm more interested in than the good conversation. What are you trying to create in the world? What do you want to see more of in the world? What's really important to you? What are your values? What's your vision? And then 4 is to look at do the decisions that you're making line up with what you're trying to create in the world? Does it line up with what you believe good to be? Does it line up with your vision and your values? Does it sync up? Does it feel like it matches for you? And if not, what do you want to do differently? And if it does feel like it's aligned, amazing, keep going. Now, I said at the beginning of this video that this process is really simple, and it is. You can make it more complicated if you want to, and I think most of us will, because, and this is a really important tip that I wanted to give you alongside this, and it's that whether or not you're using your privilege for good is up to you. That judgment is something that only you can decide. Not everyone will agree with the decisions that you're making or feel like they are aligned with what you say you're about. And you will definitely, if not, I mean, you probably already have gotten so many external opinions about this is what you should do, this is what this is supposed to look like, this is how you should feel about this is what's wrong about what you're doing. But please hear me on this. Those moments when there is a difference between what you think is right and what someone else thinks is right, those conflicts, those disagreements, those points of tension, that is where there is the most possibility and opportunity present to create something different in the world, to create change in the world. How you decide to engage in that moment. And I'm not saying that to put a bunch of pressure on you or to make it feel like it's this huge thing, but I really just want to point out how many opportunities you have daily to create something different in the world, to shift our cultures, to open up new possibilities for our future and for future generations. Those tiny moments where you feel some discomfort or some tension and you don't know if you're about to do the right thing or if you've already done the wrong thing, those are beautiful, tiny, significant moments for you to change the world. So let's go back to when we were talking about what your definition of good is or what it is that you're trying to create in the world. And then come back to a specific moment where you've had a conflict or a disagreement with someone. Think about that moment and ask yourself, what does it look like for you to show up with integrity in that moment? Meaning that your values, your vision, and who you are get to be fully present in that interaction. This is the part that's not easy because people may not like you, agree with you. People may even say that you're out of integrity. And for some of us, including myself, that can feel like the end of the world. It can feel like, oh no, like my safety's at risk if people don't like me. And even if that's not your experience, all of us to some degree want to belong. We want to feel connected with others, and we do so much to try to make that happen. But if that comes at the sacrifice or the cost of your integrity, then what are we really doing here? And that's really my issue with what good often means to a lot of people, is that often what we'll assign good to is playing nice, not making other people uncomfortable, when in reality, that's not good. But I digress. Maybe that's another video. Let me know if that's something that you would want. So if this video affirmed or challenged or inspired you in any way, and you in general just want more content, want more information and stories on how to help change the world, make sure to like this video and also subscribe. And again, let me know in the comments, what's that one privileged identity that you're really wanting to focus on and get more conscious about. All right, until next time, go forth and be the revolution. Do it one more time. One more time.